The crux here is the right to believe or not believe whatever you wish. Religious freedom is one of the paramount fundamentals that this nation was founded on. Now, that being said, do I think they're some of the most retarded morons on the face of the earth? Absolutely, as a biologist, I do. Will I defend their right to spew whatever nonsense they choose to the death? Absolutely. I think that by trying to suppress them and trying to shut them out, we actually do more harm than in simply allowing them to spread whatever they wish to say, because if it is not said, it cannot be challenged, and if it cannot be challenged, it is much more insidious than something that you can see and identify and attack and challenge and coax people to think more and more into their position. I have a good example for you. I was homeschooled. I was in a Christian homeschool group. You want to talk a bunch of weirdos? You've got it right there. My best friend, her mother took her to classes where they were taught that fossils were planted in the ground by Satan in order to deceive man and to lead him away from God. Okay? Now, my parents very much did not believe that. My father is very agnostic, a-religious. My mother is a Seventh-day Adventist. Funny you should mention that. But it has been interesting in that I have always had a perspective that understands and encompasses differences in time and the potential for a universe that is not limited to a textual basis, which is what the young earth creationists base their foundation on. Oh, it says in Genesis, and we can calculate back to this year and this, that, and the other. It has been very interesting to me to argue with this friend of mine and to watch her grow. She's actually an archaeologist now, and so I've seen her go through that evolution. Now, if that viewpoint had never been put out there for her and it had always been kind of an undercurrent in her parents' teaching and in her social circle, she never would have challenged it. But because it was brought out into the open, it was exposed to be attacked, she has grown as a person, she has grown in her intellectual understanding and in her faith. Does that make sense?
Let me rephrase the question.
Okay.
I have debated the pastor of Summit Church so many times that we've become close friends. He informs me of all the creationist events, he gives me free books.
Excellent.
I mean, we talk by email every week or two. I like this guy. I maybe even love this guy. I think he's totally deluded. What is the loving thing to do for someone like that? How do you, I mean, how do you love the creationists and lead them to some kind of enlightenment?
Part of the problem when it comes to young earth creationism is that on the matter of tolerance you were talking about earlier, I think I'm tolerant. Most people are tolerant. The problem is not so much tolerating their beliefs as when it becomes a political machine, it goes into the public square, starts making political moves. Then, certainly, it's open to skepticism, criticism, condemnation, rebuttal. Nobody, I suppose, particularly cares if somebody reads their Bible and concludes that nothing's more than a few thousand years old. But when they try to come out and tell you in the public square, a public school is going to teach this because I believe that, then it's not being intolerant to say, okay, let's have a discussion about it and debate it. And if you lose the debate, you don't get to push it in the science curricula of our public schools.
But they're not losing the debate everywhere. There have been 7 anti-evolution bills introduced in the state legislatures this year so far.
Well,
okay.
All sorts of crazy shit gets introduced in legislation.
Absolutely.
Your point's well
taken. There are flat earth creationists in public office in Texas.
They need to be dealt with.
Let's go ahead and move on to Baxter back here.
I just want to kind of throw out 2 sort of different points and then get your opinions on them. A lot of people believe that the Bible is the Word of God, but God said that Jesus was the Word made flesh. So you've got that statement there, and then over here, to paraphrase loosely Stephen Hawking, maybe science is the way God talks to us. What do you guys think of that?
God is the way, science is the way God talks to us in that He gave us the natural revelation and the tools to understand it. Do we understand it? We're bound by our own history. Some of it we can, some of it we can't. It's a continually changing thing. Just as we discussed earlier, nobody's got all the answers in religion. Nobody's got a perfect understanding of the Bible. We're skeptical. My views have been reevaluated throughout the course of my life. And it's an ongoing thing, an evolution, as you might say. And from my own perspective, there is a God. He did reveal himself to us. We have a written record of that revelation, a special revelation in a word, but we also have this natural revelation. We have to study both. And if we were good at it, we could reconcile the two.
Looks like we have time for about 1 to 2 more questions. Let's go ahead and go here and then here. Yes.
This is for Gabriel and Kevin. Something that really bugs me about atheists is their use of the word spiritual. They're always
I thought it was, okay, go ahead, sorry. I don't know that many atheists who commonly use the word spiritual. But finish your question, maybe you're going to say.
Yeah, that atheists can have a spirituality as well as religious people, and we can have this same emotional experience. And,
Okay.
well, if you're not familiar with
Oh, that I am familiar with, and I don't disagree with that necessarily.
especially like Sam
Some
Harris
qualifications.
and whatnot, but coming from the root of spirit, soul, and whatnot, can we not use other words to describe emotional responses?
I recently read a really great book. I forgot the author, but it's called The Spirituality of an Atheist. And I think everyone gets caught up on the definitions. Spirituality to a Christian is a completely different thing compared to the spirituality of a Buddhist. Spirituality to me is, and I consider myself agnostic but not atheist, but spirituality to me is being in tune with myself and with the universe. And I think it's just that you got to define the definitions of the word before you could claim that's what you feel or otherwise.
Yeah, maybe are you saying maybe we need a better word for these things so that we're not confused with? Yeah, and for some reason it seems to me there's some other issue where maybe in atheism where the wording leads people astray. But yeah, you're probably right. You probably need some other word.
I hate to rush along the panel, but we should probably move on to the last question. It's actually noon right now, so we're probably going to run a couple minutes late with this last question.
I'd like you all to define what a skeptic is. So I think, to me, you guys are all skeptics. And I think if you don't question one belief, you're still a skeptic. To me, it's more of a majority. If you use skepticism, the majority of your life, I consider you a skeptic. So I kind of was interested in how you guys all define skepticism. What is a skeptic?
Gonna go down the line?
Yeah.
Well, I think we're all skeptics to a degree. It's a matter of degree, I suppose. Skepticism is good. You evaluate, you analyze, you judge. Every day we're called to deal with matters that we can either accept or not accept. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things that makes us what we are is that we don't have to question everything, although it can be risky business. The reason we're able to do as much as we can is because we have a characteristic of being able to believe. We couldn't have this university if students couldn't believe what their teachers told them. You can't question everything. But the extent to which you question and draw your own conclusions and deal with everyday life varies from individual to individual.
I consider a skeptic person to be a critical person and someone who's never certain, which is where lies in my belief that being a Christian is just as absurd as being an atheist.
What came to mind in thinking about this was, has anyone read, excuse me, an essay called On Bullshit by Harry Frankfurt. Terrific essay, you should read it. And he defines bullshit as basically just making things up, not lying exactly because you don't know the truth of the matter. The problem with bullshit, people who bullshit, is that they have no regard whatsoever for the truth, right? They don't know if what they're saying is true or false, they just don't care. So skepticism to me is, in a sense, is a bit the opposite of that, is having some kind of concern for truth. And then, of course, you have to ask yourself other questions about, well, how do I discern one from the other, and so forth. But to me, just keeping that goal of capital T truth in front of you as much as possible, and constantly aiming at it and reevaluating your methods and so forth. And maybe you don't get there, but at least you can get closer, sort of like an asymptote or something, that's constantly approaching that line that never gets there.
My definition of a skeptic is simply someone who applies critical thought to the available arguments and positions and chooses accordingly.
I define a skeptic as someone who is willing to approach any given situation with a wholly open mind and who challenges their own preconceptions and uses critical thinking to work through the available data that they have to them. But that is not to say that skeptics are inherently unbiased. Each of us as an individual brings our own individual biases to our critical evaluation of something. A skeptic is someone who is willing to come in and say, okay, what do I have before me, and can examine things from multiple different perspectives before deciding which one will be the predominant one to go with.
Well, for me, skepticism it's a toolbox. It's a set of, different tools for evaluating, all the claims that you kind of have to deal with in a daily, your daily life. And science is a huge part of that. Science and, logic.
All right, that sounds like a perfect note to end on. Just a note, we're headed to lunch right now. There's a lot of restaurants within walking distance. Go ahead and grab anyone in a purple shirt if you need some advice on that. And let's have a big hand for our panelists.